jobs include students employed in civic education. We talked about that. And you can pay up to 100%. For Perkins Loan Program, back to talking about Perkins, it is a loan. It's campus-based and it is a loan. Again, they're not funding any more capital for that. You're just awarding what you're actually bringing in at this point. Some schools have chosen to liquidate the program and send it back to the Fed and say, I don't even have Perkins loans anymore. A lot of the default rates, I think, are going up. Ours is higher than our Stafford default rate. So you need to keep a watch on that as well. There is a master promissory note, MPN. Master promissory note is required for Perkins loan. In our situation, it is electronic because we work with ECSI. With them, they have created a master promissory note that is electronic, works very, very well. The MPN was September 30th, 2015, expiration date now required. That's new for me, so let me. Sean, do you know what I'm sorry, September 15th?
I apologize, Bridget. What did you say?
I apologize. I'm reading a slide. The MPN was September 30th, 2015, expiration date now required. I missed that when I was doing my studies on this, so sorry.
They just come out with different versions every couple of years.
Is that all it is?
Yeah.
Make sure you have
Okay.
it.
If you look at the paper one, or if you actually print one, it's typically in the top right-hand corner.
Okay.
An expiration date.
And I don't see these master promissory notes again because it's where it's supposed to be over in our business office, separated from what we're doing. And thank you, I'm glad. Because did you work with that in the business office world? I figured you must have. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And the student sees it from an electronic side, so they're not bringing anything into me to see that. So just note, obviously makes sense that they're updating it every year with a different date. Eligible students are undergrad and grad. Must have an official expected family contribution on a valid SAR ISER before you award it. So you have to have an official ISER or output. The priority, again, is for exceptional need and a willingness to repay. I guess you just say, you want to repay this? Yes, ma'am, I am.
Yes.
When Kachi was at, Kachi that you met this morning was at a community college, she had a student that looked her in the eye and said, I ain't gonna pay these loans back. Kachi said, you ain't gonna have them. And she won that case because that student was adamant that they had no intention of paying that loan back. She's only done it one time, and she's the only person I've ever known who's done it. But that's exactly what happened. So that's why that's there, believe it or not. Now, this day and time, and you know, a lot is put on us, but we have that purview. You can't just say, I think you're not going to pay this loan back, because I know there are times when you feel like there are students that are just not committed that they're going to do that. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about blatant, outright telling you, and if I'm not mistaken, this student put it in writing. Yes, ma'am.
Who do they pay it back to?
The Perkins loan is paid back to, it's a loan made by the institution with a federal allocation. So in our situation, they're technically paying it back to Barton College. It's back to the college. But most schools that I know of right now do not handle Perkins in-house. ECU does, unless they change. They may have changed. They used to have a student loans office that handled all of their Perkins loan collections. So some of your larger institutions will have that, and they know the federal regulations, and they, you know, stay abreast of all of that. That's been 20-something years ago now that I was there.
Goes to Charlotte. I think it's Charlotte. If they're repaying it, it'll come to Charlotte, not us.
Exactly, and so it used to be literally the student loans office, but and a lot of schools have gone to third-party servicers because it's a whole lot less expensive to stay abreast of current regulations, and especially with it not being, I'm seeing shaking of heads back there as well. So, but back in the day, you paid the school back, so you are paying Barton back, or you're paying your institution back, but it's being serviced. Ours is being serviced by ECSI. It's an old EduServe, Wachovia. It's been named a whole bunch of things over the years. So, but it's technically from the school, but it's federal funds. Okay. Good question. Exceptionally willing to pay determination eligibility or ineligibility. Now, special provisions for less than full-time and independent students. So just be aware that you need to, read some of those more carefully when it comes down to that. Ineligible students, incarcerated students in a federal or state penal institution, and medical interns and residents. So if they're in residency or internship, they cannot have that. Medical school, they could. Annual loan limits, $5,500 in an undergrad program, $8,000 in a grad professional program. So that's the maximum that you can award. The aggregate, I think I said this wrong a while ago when I was looking at it. The aggregate is $11,000 for a student who has not completed 2 academic years of undergraduate work. So they have to have 2 years of undergraduate work under their belt, or $11,000 is the aggregate, right? $27,500 for undergrad who has completed 2 academic and is pursuing a bachelor's degree. And $60,000 grad professional, including undergraduate loans. So they add that together. So that's not 60 additional, that's 60 altogether from undergrad to grad. So there are some aggregate limits there. Again, back in the day when, if you're wondering why Perkins loan is 5%, that was a very, very good interest rate back in the day when we were lending Stafford loans at 12%. 10%, I'm sorry. SLS was 12%. The Stafford loans, back in the day, they were called guaranteed student loans, or GSLs. We were lending them at 8% and 10%, and then 8/10%. They would move. 5% sounds really good compared to that, right? Well, then we got into a situation where the Stafford loans became variable every year, and the interest rate plummeted and got down to a really, really low 2 and 3% interest rate. Now they're creeping back up, as you know. So that's where that came from, is when the Perkins loan. Perkins loan used to be called the National Defense Student Loan, then it was the National Direct Student Loan, and then they named it the Perkins loan after Mr. Perkins. I don't know all the details exactly on that, but same thing with Pell, after Senator Pell from Rhode Island. Stafford loan, also after a legislator. It's, you know, it's sexier to have your name on something, I guess, than to make something else better. Let's just create a new fund. You didn't hear me say that, but you know, that's a lot of this stuff is historical, and that's where it's coming from. And you're thinking 5%, wow, that used to be a good deal. Example: my husband, who was a teacher back in the day, he taught at a Title I. Get all my titles mixed up: Title III, Title IX, Title X, Title IV. Title I institution, Title I school, which is a, say it for me, AJ. Title I is based on, he worked at the school system, that's why I'm asking. Based on free and reduced lunch and a percentage of that, correct? I'm just trying to say it correct. I call it a low-income school, is what they a lot of times call, but not necessarily the case. It's the free and reduced lunch, ratio. If you work there, then you, each year, if you had a Perkins loan, you can forgive a percentage of your Perkins loan amount. So look into that. There are forgiveness provisions along with that. My husband was able to participate because he taught at a school that was a Title I school. At the time, AJ, it was Elm City. I don't think that's the case anymore because it's changing its demographics in our county. But so, there were some benefits to having a Perkins loan as opposed to a guaranteed student loan that at the time had no forgiveness provision whatsoever, right? So, grace period. It has a 9-month grace period, as opposed to the 6-month grace period that you're hearing a lot of talk about doing away with too, right? Up to 10 years to repay. Minimum monthly payment is $40. The repayment period may be extended for low income or hardship. That's also fairly new from what it used to be. There are deferment, forbearance, and cancellation provisions, and there's increased loan eligibility to cover high cost of study abroad. We mentioned that before. And a school-making Perkins loan is subject to requirements of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. So, you need to be fair with this, as I mentioned before. You can't just single out all your educators and just do that. Teachers and this is the loan cancellation provision. I call it forgiveness. I guess it's not forgiveness technically. The Perkins loan has the cancellation provision there. Teachers in designated low-income elementary and secondary schools and full-time special education. Full-time staff in pre-kindergarten and child care programs can possibly benefit from cancellation. Full-time attorneys employed in federal public defender or community defender organizations. Okay? Full-time firefighters with local, state, and federal fire department. Full-time faculty members at tribal colleges or universities. Librarians and full-time speech-language pathologists with master's degree employed at or serving Title I school. So there's several ways here that you could possibly cancel the loan out. And the way it's done is within 5 years, a percentage of the loan each year. You fill out a postponement at the beginning of the school year. After you've done your duty as the school year has progressed, you fill out the cancellation to cancel out what your payments would have been. So Not a bad thing if you're going to have that situation, but really you have to award it to a needy student. If they go into this, they get the benefit of doing that. Military service cancellation for active duty in hostile areas. It's moved now from a 50% to 100%. So you see there, the Perkins loan has a lot of different kinds of things attached to that your Stafford loans do not. Also, teachers in designated low income, elementary and secondary, I already said that. Perkins loan, let me make sure I said that. Yeah. Perkins loan exit counseling, Higher Education Opportunity Act requirements include that we explain the options to repay and pay on a shorter schedule, review the loan consolidation and refinancing, explain the use of a master promissory note, describe types of tax benefits available to borrowers, emphasize that a borrower must repay in full even if academic program not completed, so they're still responsible for it even if they don't finish school. Provide general description of forgiveness, cancellation, deferment, extensions, and forbearance, and explain how NSLDS can be used to obtain Title IV loan status information. Now, all of that is a pretty hefty list of things that you're responsible for, hence the reason a lot of us are using third-party servicers to take care of the Perkins loan information. Make sense? There is an entrance counseling that they have to do as well, and I don't think it said. There's an entrance counseling and an exit counseling. This is for your exit interview, so you have a separate kind of exit interview that has to be done for your Perkins loan. The other thing I would mention to you about your Perkins loan is that it can be consolidated with your other federal loans. So if a student is wanting to consolidate his or her Stafford loans that they've had over the years, they can consolidate Perkins loan into that. In the past, that was detrimental because they use a weighted average on the interest rate, depending on how many loans students have. Now, they're running about equal. There's probably no detriment other than losing those forgiveness provisions. If the student is in some of those areas of service, they probably do not want to consolidate that loan into an overall consolidation loan, so they could benefit from canceling that loan out and not having to pay it back if they meet qualifications of cancellation. Does that make sense? But just know that it can be lumped into that consolidation loan if they so choose. So if I had it, I'm working in financial aid, I could consolidate all mine along with the Stafford loans if I chose to do that. But students need to be very careful, again, because of the weighted average on the interest rate rounded up to the nearest 8% in a consolidation loan. Rosemary is going to tell you all there is to know. You have consolidation in your? Sure. She'll tell you that. She wasn't, she is now. Sure. Teach grants. As I said to you before, I have not awarded teach grants, so I'm going to give you some information kind of quickly, and maybe some of you who are already participating in that can help me some of this. I've got the information, I've read it, I've been in training sessions on it, but just have not awarded this myself. So just rather tell you that up front. So it started in 0809. It's a non-need-based fund. It's up to $4,000 per year for the first undergrad or post-baccalaureate degree. $16,000 aggregate and $4,000 per year for graduate student and $8,000 aggregate. I cannot talk this morning or this afternoon. School eligibility provides a high-quality teacher preparation and professional development service. I do know the school has to apply to participate with the Teach Grant, and there's a specific process that you would need to go through in order to see if your school is a Teach Grant school. How many of you already know that your school is a Teach Grant school? Okay, so there are schools that choose not to participate, and some of that because the Teach Grant, there's such a stipulation on having to pay with service that you have to, I think we ended up calling it the GROAN, the grant loan, the GROAN, because the student had such a hard time ever getting to a place where they could forgive the loan. It is the way this turned out. So be very, very careful awarding this to, I would suggest, again, this is just from Liberty, it doesn't mean you cannot, I'm just telling you. For instance, if you're awarding an 18-year-old freshman a Teach Grant, that they haven't really made the decision, they really, really know that they're going to go into education. That's all I mean by that. If they know that they know that they know, it's not a problem. But there's a pretty hefty repayment if they don't go into teaching in a particular area. It becomes an unsubsidized loan with the interest accruing from when the loan is first dispersed, and that's a lot of interest and so on and so forth. So just be careful. In order to apply and be an eligible institution to award the Teach Grant, it's done on your participation agreement, the PPA. So your primary destination point administrator would have to apply to be able to participate with Teach Grant. And then if you are a Teach Grant school, you would complete a phys app. In the phys app information, you would put the information about the Teach Grant. So the phys app is the same document or the same report that you send to the feds to participate with campus-based funds. So it's a pretty big deal, okay? And that's the website that you can get information to know a lot more about that process, which I think I'm going to go to myself, getting asked from my education department about it, because they hear a lot of really wonderful things about it, and we've all kind of been a little careful in utilizing it. So, student eligibility: completing coursework necessary to begin a career in teaching as a highly qualified teacher in a high-need field in a low-income school, and may be less than full-time with the award prorated accordingly. So the student can be less than full-time, but all of those other qualifications have to be met, and that's hard for a student to determine at the moment. If we have situations, my son graduated from ECU 2 years ago now, and there were lots of conversation. He's a teaching fellow, and there was a lot of conversation that they weren't going to be able to find jobs very quickly because they were laying teachers off. So it's hard when they're their first year in school and you're trying to award them a Teach Grant to know how it's going to behave, 4, 5, 6 years down the road for a student who's getting out. So again, it sounds like I'm negative about it. I'm not. I'm just telling you to be cautious with how you award it. Be careful. Yes, ma'am.
When they're awarding the Teach Grants, is that a requirement that they have to teach in North Carolina, or is it anywhere?
It's anywhere. This is federal. If you didn't hear her, she asked, is that a requirement to teach in North Carolina? And the reason she is thinking that is because North Carolina is so good that over the years we've had a lot of teaching programs. As I said, my son was a North Carolina teaching fellow, and he had to commit to teaching in North Carolina. Now we have the Forgivable Education Loan for Service, or FELS, to where you also have to commit to, if you're going into teaching, teach in North Carolina. If it's health profession, practice in North Carolina. If it's social work, also working in North Carolina. We have a lot of those programs North Carolina centric that a lot of states don't have. But the funds we're talking about are campus-based federal funds. So this would be anywhere that are designated in those low-income areas. Good question though, because sometimes, that's what we think, and we're fortunate, I think, in our state to have all of that. Again, if you're going to award a Teach Grant, of course you're going to see if they're doing coursework to become a teacher. You need to check their major and make sure that's accurate. They have to be completing course for a graduate degree if you're giving it to a graduate student in that area. 3.25 GPA on a 4.0 scale, equivalent if the standard is 4.0, is not used by the institution. So 3.25 GPA on a 4.0 scale, we all use that. I didn't realize there was such a high GPA requirement on this either, so I'm learning that. Did you guys know that, those of you that participate? Yeah. So typically, if you're going to have someone who has that high of a GPA, they probably have, a lot of times they'll have their way mapped out, pretty well as well. Also, if the student agrees to teach for at least 4 years within 8 years of completing the program. So if they get out of school, they have 8 years to complete their service requirement. Again, if they default on the service, meaning they don't teach in one of these areas, then they would have to pay the loan back. But they do have 8 years to do that. That gives them some opportunity to maybe go to grad school or whatever they're trying to do, right? They have to participate in entrance and exit counseling, subsequent counseling annually between entrance and exit. So there's other counseling requirements that they're going to send these students through, which is not a bad idea, I don't think, either. They have to sign an agreement to serve on the website. This is the website they would go to. It's only in electronic format, and it's required for all the recipients. If you have another place they have a touch to where they're committing and understanding that what is going on, I'm sure there's information, I'm not seeing it myself, but language there to say, hey, do you really know what you're doing? Because if you don't do this, then you're going to have to repay this back. The interest rate is going to accrue. They want to make sure that they're sure that they want these funds. It has to be completed each year. So this is not a master promissory note as other things are. They have to do this each year if they're awarded. Processing Teach Grants is also through the COD, Common Origination and Disbursement System. So you provide the fundings to schools, and the records go first, and they give us the money, is what happens. So you document through COD. Again, I have not done that through COD myself, but I can't imagine that it's much different than how we're processing our Pell and our direct